My name is Thomas, I'm 52 years old, and 3 months ago I learned that blood isn't always thicker than water. Sometimes it's simply the poison running through the veins of people who think they can walk all over you just because you share a last name. As you listen to this, imagine spending your entire life savings on the wedding of your dreams, guests arriving, champagne perfectly chilled, only to reach the entrance of the property and find a brand new lock, armed security, and a court order stating you are not allowed to set foot inside. That's exactly what I did to my sister the day she decided my beach house was hers, but I wasn't worthy enough to be on her guest list. She thought my silence was weakness, and my absence meant surrender. She had no idea I was counting down the minutes to watch her sandcastle collapse in front of everyone she wanted to impress. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic scenes from me, only the sound of cold justice knocking at the door at precisely the right moment. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. To understand how we got to that point, I have to explain who I am and what that house meant to me. I'm not a man of unnecessary luxuries, but I've always believed in the value of hard work. For 25 years I worked in the logistics industry, pulling double shifts, managing crises, and saving every extra dollar. While my friends spent their money on sports cars that lost value the moment they left the dealership, I had a different goal. I wanted a refuge, a place where the noise of the world would disappear and only the sound of the ocean would remain. That beach house wasn't a gift, an inheritance, or a stroke of luck. It was the result of decades of discipline. I bought the land when it was nothing more than sand and scrub. I built the walls stone by stone, overseeing every detail, from reinforced foundations to the large windows facing the horizon. It was my sanctuary, the place where I planned to spend my quiet years after a lifetime of noise. I had one simple rule. That house was for my peace, not for anyone else's spectacle. My relationship with my sister Sophia had always been complicated, though I preferred to ignore the signs. She's 10 years younger and was always our parents' favorite. While I worked, she looked for shortcuts. While I built, she consumed. Sophia lives for appearances. Her life is a facade of social media posts, expensive dinners she can't afford, and a desperate need to belong to a social circle that, frankly, doesn't care whether she exists or not. To her, status matters more than honesty. About 2 years ago, our mother passed away. It hit hard. Our father had been gone long before that. As the older brother, I tried to be the pillar. I helped Sophia financially more times than I can count. I paid off her credit card debts, funded a design business she abandoned after 6 months, and always kept the door of my beach house open to her. I gave her a key, trusting she would respect my property. "It's your home too," I told her in moments of emotional weakness. That was my first mistake. Generosity, when given to the wrong person, becomes a weapon they will eventually use against you. Over the past year, Sophia started dating a man named Victor, a guy who introduced himself as a high-level investor, but I read him from the first minute. A showman with rented suits and a rehearsed smile. Soon, they began planning their wedding. Not a simple ceremony, but an event meant to be the social highlight of their circle of superficial friends. I watched from a distance, focusing on my work, keeping a low profile. One day, during an uncomfortable family dinner, Sophia dropped the news with a casualness that froze my blood. She was describing floral arrangements and table placements by the sea. She talked about her perfect venue. It took me a few seconds to realize she was describing my property. She didn't ask permission. She didn't check if the house was available. She simply decided that because I was her single, boring brother, my house would be the free stage for her fantasy of grandeur. When I tried to speak during that dinner, she cut me off with a dismissive wave as if I were a waiter bringing the wrong check. She told me they had already sent save the dates to their most important contacts. She said Victor had hired a luxury event planner who had already visited the property without my knowledge, using the key I had given her for emergencies. At that moment I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I watched her hands moving excitedly as she described where the dance floor would go over my teak terrace. I watched Victor nod arrogantly as if he owned the world. I realized that to them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource, an asset to be exploited. They assumed that because we were family, I would bow my head to avoid ruining the happiest day of her life. What Sophia didn't know is that I value respect above blood. She believed my silence at that table meant acceptance. She thought I was impressed by her boldness. What I was actually doing was measuring the depth of the offense, looking into the abyss she had dug between us. In my mind, the key she held was already revoked, but I said nothing yet. I wanted to see how far her entitlement would go. I wanted to see whether at any point she would remember who the man was who had given her everything when she had nothing. But the invitation never came. Weeks passed, and the preparations moved forward. I heard through distant cousins that the guest list was closed. 200 people. Business owners, local influencers, Victor's family. I wasn't on the list. My own sister was planning a wedding in my own house and had excluded me because, as she told a relative, my presence didn't fit the sophisticated aesthetic they wanted, and I would probably make things uncomfortable by questioning the use of the property. That was the moment the context shifted. It was no longer a family misunderstanding. It was an invasion and a calculated insult. I sat at my desk, poured a glass of whiskey, and looked at the blueprints of my house. She wanted a wedding worthy of a movie. I was going to make sure the ending was unforgettable, just not in the way she expected. The confirmation of the betrayal didn't come through an argument, but through an envelope I found by accident. I was at my aunt's house, and it was sitting on the entry table. A thick paper invitation with gold edges and embossed calligraphy. I opened it and read the itinerary. The ceremony would take place in my private garden, the reception on my terrace, and the party by the pool. Nowhere was my name mentioned, not even as host. On the contrary, the text clearly stated, "The families of the bride and groom are pleased to welcome you to the family's summer residence." A dry chill spread across my chest. It wasn't sadness. It was absolute clarity. Sophia wasn't just using my property without my legal consent. She was erasing my existence to sell a lie to her guests. She was turning me into a stranger in my own life so she could pretend to belong to a social class that would never truly accept her. Days later, I decided to go to my beach house unannounced. I wanted to see the extent of the audacity. When I arrived, I found 3 moving trucks and a decoration crew drilling into my exterior walls to hang lights. They had moved my furniture into the garage storage without covering the leather, exposing it to dust and humidity. They had uprooted plants I had cultivated for years to install a metal structure for the altar. Sophia was there, wearing a wide-brim hat and holding a tablet, giving orders to the workers. When she saw me, there was no sign of guilt, no hug, just annoyance as if I were an inconvenient tax auditor. She didn't even let me step past the entrance. "Thomas, what are you doing here? We're very busy," she said without even looking up from her screen. Her tone was sharp, stripped of any warmth. I calmly asked why people were drilling into my house and why I hadn't received an invitation. She shrugged with an indifference that made my stomach turn. She explained with twisted logic that the house technically belonged to everyone because it was family property, ignoring the fact that I had paid for it with every drop of my sweat. "Don't make this complicated," she added with a fake smile. "This is a high-level wedding. Victor brought very important people, partners who can change our future. You wouldn't feel comfortable, Thomas. You're too rustic for this environment. I don't want you there with that judgmental face ruining the photos. Besides, I need the rooms for Victor's groomsmen. We already packed your things. They're in boxes out back. You can pick them up after the honeymoon." I stayed silent, watching her gestures. She avoided direct eye contact, fully immersed in her world of appearances. Victor came out of the house at that moment, dressed in designer clothes he probably hadn't paid for yet. He didn't even greet me. He simply shouted to Sophia that the catering needed more space in the kitchen and that they should remove that old refrigerator clutter I valued so much. Something broke in me then, permanently. I felt no urge to fight or shout that it was my house. My professional mind, the one that handles logistics and contracts, took over. I realized my sister didn't see me as family, but as a silent obstacle. They were evicting me from my own refuge, my sanctuary, treating me like an inconvenient tenant who didn't even deserve to stand in the garden while they celebrated their charade. "I understand," I said. Those were the only words I spoke. Sophia nodded, satisfied at having put me in my place so easily. She turned away and continued shouting at a decorator about the color of the chair ribbons. I walked to my car, feeling the weight of the keys in my pocket. The keys to the house she believed she had conquered. As I drove away, I saw in the rearview mirror a large wooden sign being placed at my entrance with their names intertwined. That night, I arrived at my apartment in the city and sat in the dark. The emptiness was immense, but my resolve was steel. I had been the protective brother, the one who paid the bills, the keeper of secrets. That man died that afternoon at the beach entrance. They had taken my place, my respect, and my peace. They had turned me into a ghost in my own home. The humiliation was public, so the response would have to be as well. She wanted an unforgettable wedding, and I intended to grant that wish with mathematical precision. It wouldn't be a family tantrum, it would be a lesson in ownership, legality, and reality. The wedding was in 2 weeks. I had just enough time to move the pieces on the board without anyone noticing my hand. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a shadow. Rage, if left unchecked, makes you careless, but cold discipline allows you to be precise. The first thing I did was call Robert, an old friend and property law attorney I've worked with for years. We sat in his office, far from familiar eyes. I placed the property documents on the table and explained the situation without embellishment. Robert looked at me over his glasses, surprised not by the illegality, but by the audacity of my own blood. "Thomas, legally this is trespassing and unauthorized use of private property for commercial or event purposes," he said, marking key points with his pen. "We could stop everything right now with a court order." But I didn't want to stop it yet. If I shut it down early, Sophia would simply find another venue, play the victim to the family, and I'd remain the bitter brother who ruined her plans. No, I wanted the impact to be total. I wanted the cost to be irreversible. My plan relied on patience. I let the flower trucks keep arriving. I let the catering company install their industrial ovens and silk tents. I even allowed a local society magazine to publish a piece about the exclusive seaside wedding. Meanwhile, I was formally revoking all access permissions to the property. Robert drafted the legal notices, but we didn't send them by mail. We held them for the exact moment. I hired a private security firm, serious professionals with dark uniforms and stone faces. I gave clear instructions. No one enters or leaves the property on Saturday after 3 p.m. without my explicit authorization. I handed them the property titles and the preventive eviction orders Robert had prepared. I also contacted the utility companies. In that area, high-capacity water and electricity contracts for events must be under the property owner's name. Sophia, in her endless arrogance, had attempted to place the wedding's additional services under my account, assuming I wouldn't notice until after the event. I called the providers and, with the calm of someone cancelling an unnecessary subscription, suspended all scheduled service for that weekend due to urgent structural maintenance. I observed from a distance. I drove by a couple of times in a rental car to avoid recognition. I watched as they built a glass structure over my pool. I saw thousands of dollars worth of white orchids being hung. Orchids that, without the climate control I had just cut off, wouldn't survive more than a few hours under the harsh coastal sun. Every move they made was an expense they wouldn't recover. Every detail they added was another brick in the wall that would soon collapse over their heads. My final move was a short message to the main vendors on Friday night. I didn't tell them to cancel. I simply sent a copy of the property title along with a legal warning. Any equipment left at this address after 3 p.m. Saturday will be considered abandoned property or subject to legal dispute due to trespass. Some called in panic, but Sophia, desperate to maintain appearances, assured them everything was under control, that I was just a difficult relative and she would take responsibility. She personally signed liability documents that night, assuming the debts if anything went wrong. She placed the noose around her own neck. I went to bed early that Friday. I felt no anxiety, only a deep calm. The kind you feel when a complex logistical plan is finally in motion, and all that remains is to let gravity do its work. She wanted a wedding without me. I was going to give her exactly that, a wedding where I wouldn't be present, but where my authority would be the only guest that truly mattered. Saturday dawned under a scorching sun, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the pavement. I dressed slowly, chose a dark blue linen shirt, and sat waiting a few miles from my property at a small cafe facing the main road. My phone rested on the table, Robert, my attorney, on direct call. At 2 in the afternoon, the parade of luxury cars began to pass. I saw the white limousine carrying Sophia, wrapped in silk and illusions, feeling like the owner of an empire that was never hers. At exactly 3 o'clock, I gave the signal. 3 black SUVs from the security company I had hired pulled in, blocking the private road leading to my house. 6 men in tactical uniforms stepped out, court orders in hand. At the same time, the power company cut the main supply. My house, which at that moment should have been buzzing with music and cool air for 200 guests, fell into a suffocating silence under the brutal heat. I walked toward the entrance minutes later. The scene was absolute chaos. Cars lined up along the road, guests in expensive suits stepping out confused and sweating under the sun. At the front gate, Victor was shouting at one of my guards, waving his arms and pointing toward the house. Sophia came running from the garden, her wedding dress dragging across the gravel, her face flushed with rage, makeup beginning to melt in the heat. When she saw me step out of the car, she rushed toward the gate. "Thomas, tell them to let us in. There's no power. The ovens aren't working and people are suffocating out here. Do something," she shouted, her voice no longer authoritative, but raw with panic. I looked at her with the same calm she once used to tell me I didn't fit the aesthetic of her wedding. I didn't move. I didn't react. "I can't do anything, Sophia," I replied evenly, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is private property, and there are no authorized events here today. In fact, you're trespassing. My security team has orders to escort everyone off the premises within the next 10 minutes. Victor tried to step in, attempting to intimidate me. "I paid a fortune for this catering, you idiot. I have important partners here. I'll sue you." Robert, standing beside me, simply handed him a folder with legal documents. "You haven't paid for this property, sir. In fact, here is the complaint for property damage and unauthorized use. If you do not leave immediately, law enforcement, already on the way, will proceed with trespassing charges." The silence that followed cut through the heat. Guests began stepping back, whispering among themselves. Sophia looked at me as if she didn't recognize me. "I'm your sister, Thomas. It's my wedding day." I looked at her one last time, taking in her expensive dress and her desperation. "You were my sister when you asked me for help with your debts. You stopped being my sister when you decided my home was yours, and I didn't belong in it. You wanted a wedding without me, Sophia. Here it is. Enjoy it outside, because no one is going back inside." The police arrived shortly after. It was a cinematic humiliation. I watched waiters begin carrying out boxes of food already spoiling without refrigeration. I watched the important guests Sophia had been desperate to impress turn around and head back to their cars, complaining about the heat and the disaster. Victor and Sophia stood in the middle of the road, surrounded by luggage and wilting flowers, as my guards secured the heavy steel lock I had personally installed. I stayed long enough to watch the white limousine drive away with the couple inside, defeated and silent. I felt no joy, only a deep, heavy satisfaction. There were no final words from me, just the sound of the lock clicking shut. My house was mine again. My peace was no longer for sale. Within hours, silence returned to my property, but the devastation left outside my gates was complete. Sophia called me relentlessly over the next 3 days, moving from desperate tears to threats and finally to absolute silence when she realized she hadn't just lost her wedding venue. The vendors' invoices were starting to arrive. Having signed as personally responsible without my authorization, she was left with a debt that will take decades to repay. Victor, the man with the bright future, disappeared shortly after photos of the disaster began circulating in the social circles he cared so much about. It turned out his status was as fragile as the relationship he had with my sister. My family called me cruel and cold. They said a man with my financial means should have shown mercy. But mercy is for those who make mistakes, not for those who deliberately plan your humiliation. I cut ties with all of them. I sold that beach house. It was no longer my sanctuary after being tainted by their ambition, but the proceeds now sit safely in an account they will never touch. I've learned that loyalty based solely on blood is a trap for men who have something to offer. I regret nothing. Some will say I lost my family, but I prefer to believe I finally cleared my life of parasites. Now I live with the calm of someone who knows his respect has no price, and his space is sacred. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story felt as intense to you as it was for me to live it, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next stories.